some of my stuff.
Miles, we have some questions based on some of your other previous interviews, and Kathy's going to ask.
Okay, I'd like to ask about, on behalf of Spiral anyway, because he said that he finds your initiating the Irish UFO Research Centre is very interesting to him, and he wonders what gave you the drive and impetus to do what you have done with the Basis series and Amash.
Right. I've been in UFOs since I've been knee-high to a grasshopper.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
Spinning forward to 1993.
Oh, why don't you speak about the first memory or something of your UFO?
That's what I'm doing.
Oh, all right. All right, go on.
I interviewed a guy called Ray Wardle, who had a traumatic series of events happening at the 3rd International UFO Congress. And that was in the Showboat Hotel in Las Vegas.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, what happened was that he had come to me at the, I think it was the 30th anniversary of the British UFO Research Association in England, in London, and we became good buddies.
Yes.
Now, why he came to me, I don't know, but he did, and he gave me an awful lot of material that he'd been recording. For instance, the stuff like Hoagland's Mars, the Face on Mars videos from Richard Hoagland, Coast to Coast, Radio 2000 with Art Bell, a whole pile of stuff, which basically nobody in the UK had any clue about. Okay, so to have all this information straight from the horse's mouth in Las Vegas was a really big thing. So we were good mates. We met. I met him and I brought my camera over with me, my good old Super VHS camera, which cost a small fortune, 1993, and he'd been spending a great deal of time in the desert, and he'd noticed an awful lot of things going on, and he was basically an English Italian who was now doing the surveillance cameras in the casinos in Las Vegas. And that's another story, but because he picked up some non-humans on the cameras. Oh, okay. And he was able to run down and see, look, did you not see the aliens? The actual teller who had actually been gambling with these ETs, these strange hybrid human children or beings or whatever they were, had no recollection of this, but he'd caught them on camera. Wow! Because that's what the casino cameras do. Yes. And he because of his interest in this, he actually got those videos. And when I was at the Super Soldier Conference, Super Soldier Summit, I interviewed Misha Johnston. From about that era, she referred to that and a lot of other things. Now the point about it is that Wardle went through a traumatic experience. At the end of the conference, the UFO Congress, we were all told that there's no more space in the hotel and we were all had to go. Nobody could stay another night in the hotel. They made that announcement. However, me being special, I'm allowed to stay another night in the hotel. Okay? Yes. Secondly, my hotel room was at the very end of the block, which meant that if somebody wanted to be outside, they would be able to transmit things into the hotel room. Oh, wow. Okay. Or the next door neighbour. This was quite important, which I noticed. Now, the thing was that I interviewed Ray because I'd been shooting the Irish era of pirate radio. I had got used to doing an awful lot of interviews with people over a long period of time. So this was basically a continuation with this interview with Ray. I started to build up interviews. And it wasn't until this was a really seriously traumatic time, and that interview was very, very disturbing. And when I got home, both British intelligence wanted to watch it, and later on French intelligence wanted to watch it. And thirdly, I wanted to erase the tape I put the tape in to erase. It played through the machine to erase, and it didn't erase.
Wow.
Now the main thing about the thing was that when I got home to Northern Ireland, there was a tremendous amount of static on the audio of the interview.
Yes.
The camera was also focusing and defocusing on something else which was not visible to us in the room.
Wow.
There was something on his left shoulder which the camera kept on shifting focus to.
Wow.
Secondly, this swishing, clicking noise, the static, was not acoustically audible in the room, but was being picked up by the camera. And the level of noise on the interview would change depending on the meaning of the content of what was being asked. And for instance, Ray was able to describe that there were 3 people who were interviewing him. One was Eddie Page, another guy was, name just escapes me, but he was actually a speaker at the Congress, right? And there was a third woman who's was very crucial as to she was, I think, conducting the hypnosis. He was put under hypnosis and interrogated for several hours in the middle of the night. The noise level on the audio specifically bubbled up. This is like a dreadful sort of staticky, swirling noise. And I could not get the name of that person from the audio, even transferring it, different filters, putting it on the cassette tape, listening in very great detail, which is very difficult with this noise. This is a camera which is placed approximately 2 to 3 feet away from Ray, at most maybe 3 feet.
Yeah.
And the camera's microphone is pointing right at him, and you can't hear what he's saying.
Good God.
But you can hear every other subtle little noise in the room. But this swishing, clicking noise is in there. Now, subsequent analysis appears that this was some kind of high frequency infrasound, which was a static noise, and it was the camera's electronics which was essentially demodulating this, which is why it wasn't available on the audio picked up by the microphone, but it was being picked up by the electronics, which was then putting it onto the audio, onto the audio track as recorded. So the point about that was, after that, I left Ray back. He was really wandering. He was in a hell of a state. I then walked into another person there who was a healer and a perceiver of other beings and entities.
Yes.
And at that point, she came back to my hotel room, and she detected there were something in the region of approximately six grey ETs were in my hotel room. Right, now these are not in a visible state, but they're there.
Yeah.
And she basically determined that if I was to spend another night in that hotel room, remember everybody else has been told you can't stay, but I can stay.
Yeah.
And you've got these 6 greys in my hotel room. So they were going to be ready for whatever they're going to do to me that night. So at that point, being a healer, she was a healer, and she was also able to heal and help people, but also a higher perceiver. Now at that point, I had a clue about all this sort of stuff.
Yes.
So I had to learn very, very quickly
Good
what the hell was going on, right?
Yeah.
So we then went to a new hotel that was built at the time called the Luxor, which is the Pyramid Hotel in Las Vegas with the massive beam of light. At that point, in the hotel room, in the Luxor, a number of other ETs came in, and what you heard as she was perceiving these beings, but when they arrived, there'd be a little click, little crack, little crack of energy would sort of as they came in, and this event then ramped up in seriousness really quickly, right? Now, it was so serious, she then contacted a healer who heals healers. And I spoke to him very briefly, And he was able to determine that I had very serious damage to my etheric soul, and other elements of my person was under very serious attack. And I was beginning to have to really learn a lot fast in this environment. And it was then he actually said that I had been abducted when I was young.
Okay.
Okay, and that's the reference to that question.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he was with a thing called Project Looking Glass,
Okay.
which subsequently, some years later, a lot more materials come out about that.
Wow. Okay. About you personally?
No, just about Project Looking Glass.
Okay.
Yes.
And James Casbolt refers to it, but what James Casbolt's referring to as Looking Glass, I think it's a different project.
Okay.
In terms
So I can
of,
see how he met up with these people
right.
now.
Now the point about the Irish UFO Research Centre
Yeah.
was that I formed that when I was at school with John Hind. I managed to get a double-page spread in the Belfast newsletter, which is the morning paper. I think it was also the Belfast Telegraph, but the double was when the newsletter was a big format paper. We didn't have the small format papers then. Way back when I was at school at Campbell College, because I was educated at a posh school.
Okay.
What I was, right?
Yes.
And this is a symptom of our parents really pushing to have us put into the best schools.
Yeah.
At that time, they put a huge amount of time into that.
Yeah.
Now, the thing about this is that that means I've been way into UFOs. I had a big argument. I've always said it was one of my physics teachers who protested rather too strongly that the whole thing was bunk, that made me pursue this more aggressively,
Okay.
because his constant denial.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, it's all rubbish, blah, blah, blah. So
Can you remember your first statement or conversation with him?
I was just into UFOs, and he poo-pooed it. And
Did he ridicule you?
He didn't. No, it was. I was always in the Irish Astronomical Association.
Okay.
So, and I was at the very first day of the Irish of the Armagh Planetarium, and it was opened by Patrick Moore, who was its curator for I think the first 2 or 3 years. And he actually signed a little book on my birthday. I think it was. I don't know what day
Sweet.
it was way back, whenever that was, maybe in '68 or something like
Yeah.
that, sometime
Oh,
around.
nice. Okay.
So I was always mad into the Apollo thing,
Yeah,
and,
the
and
universe.
space and
Yeah.
astronomy and all that.
Yeah.
Big interest, and then the UFO thing.
Yeah.
And we set that up at school and
All right.
University.
Okay. He also asks, who was another?
The anonymous voice can
Who
speak.
was- Oh.
No, can't speak. Did
Yeah.
you read it? Didn't happen. Isn't there?
Be quiet. All
Sorry.
right. Okay. He also, this is Spiral, comments anyway. That he thinks the UK is much more affected by the phenomena that you cover than people think, and the fact that it is a small group of small islands. It's very easy to monitor and control is of significance. If you take the amount of animal mutilations and disappearances, for instance, coupled with the behaviour of vets, who it would appear are all in on it. Do you have a comment to that?
They're all in on it. Medical profession, the police are in on it. The mental health people are in on it, particularly when it comes to certain blood groups. Kathy Morgan of the who I interviewed for the Amash project as one of the first interviews for the Amash project, but really it's a basis thing, but who cares? The main thing is that her study, and she's done a very good detailed study on all this, is that basically the United Kingdom, the British Isles, is possibly one of the most mind-controlled countries on the planet. Now, her work references way back into the 1800s. So this is a long-term strategy involving the aristocracy, political powers that be, and for instance, she was able to identify whole villages who would change overnight because the whole population of that village would be moved on to other places.
Good
They were
God.
all commonly linked, and they just come and just go. These whole things would happen, and that was particularly what she was talking about in the Bath and Bristol area, where a particular village that in her work that she'd researched was used for this. Now we then have the whole child abuse thing, where children are used for satanic or these magical rituals, which basically means that if you the British Isles, and I include Ireland in that as the British Isles, is heavily controlled by, I think, a non-human element of a particularly nasty parasitic kind.
Yeah.
That was a long question. Does that refer to that accurately?
Yes, I would say so. I'll ask him.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, getting on to another person would like the idea of the fluidic reality of space-time to be expanded on.
Well, essentially, when they start messing about with space-time, and let's be very clear about this, if you read Tom Bearden's books, and I'm sure there's a number of other scientific books on this, is that it's possible to directly engineer space-time, to directly control it, manipulate it, and do things with it. When they switch on the space-time fluidic reality things, what happens is, if you're careful, is that a lot of these things you only notice when things change. So you've got to be looking out for unexpected changes in relative dimensional size. I compare it to having, if you have like 8 peas in a pod, and you're all inside the pod, and you're all bunched up with 8 peas in the pod. If you take 1 pea out of the pod for a few seconds, and you're all bunched up with 8 peas in the pod, if you take 1 pea out of the pod for a few seconds, you've got a bit of extra space, right? And you only notice that for a few seconds until everything equalizes and settles down. You then bring another 8th pea into the pod, then everybody's getting a little bit less space. And relative to each other, this is all down to relativity. So relatively speaking, things take a few seconds to sort of squeeze and ooze out a bit, and then retain their relative perspective, the relativity, right? The relative positions that you're in.
Yeah.
But when the relative density changes, you've got that few seconds to notice the things have sort of sprung back in and out, okay? Because there's an energy change in the space-time density of where you are in. So the relative space will be the same, but if it suddenly goes up that size and it goes back down this size,
Okay, it's being fluid.
you will see a change.
Yeah.
And for those few seconds. Now the other thing is that we noticed that the Energy 106 pirate radio station, which I ran for almost 10 years, that we had a lot of fluidic relativity problems. We're dealing with a straightforward 20-foot container, steel container with transmitters in it.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now the point about that is that's a box. It doesn't move. It's made of steel.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change. When you then find that a certain part of that box is getting much bigger in one end.
Oh God, really?
Okay?
All right.
And for instance, I'm 6'1" on a good day, and I can't really stare on top of a 6.5 foot transmitter unless I sort of jump up or use a thing called a step ladder.
Yeah.
But during these fluidic spatial dimension times, it was very easy for me on the odd occasion when this was happening, for me to look very easily over the top of the transmitter and see what was going on if I needed to do something. This is, something that you would normally need a little ladder to do, which means that fluidic, the space-time was no longer stable, and that little thing about the pea in the pod, when you've only got a couple of seconds, when you take a pea in or take a pea out. On this occasion, this would be sustained. So you basically got somebody who's gating in, for want of a better term. Again, we're limited by incorrect languages when we're dealing with these kind of terms. but it meant that one particular part of the container was sort of hanging out into a different dimension.
Wow.
Right, so
Okay.
somebody was gating in, porting
Okay.
in, right?
Yeah.
Now, the other little symptom about that is how you would have a sort of a mist. You'd get a sort of a white mist, as if there was a fog beginning to appear inside the container.
Wow.
Okay, that was an indication that something else, some other density of something was in there.
Okay.
And then that's when we had the scuttlers would be detected. For instance, you've got basically a 5.5 kilowatt FM broadcast transmitter. I would be there doing maintenance, so there'd be a problem, the transmitter wouldn't be working, or some kind of issue, that's why I was there. And just taking the inner section of the transmitter, it's called the RF cavity, it's basically the box which holds all the high power output components, and that has to be sealed to stop the radio frequency energy coming out of it. So you've got to undo this. Now you take this large plate off, which is about this size, large metal plate, and for the few seconds you would see a large black spider crab type thing, a little bit bigger than my hand, moving off the main high frequency, high power. There'd be like 7.5 thousand volts on this thing normally, and this thing had been on the actual high power output valve, which we were using pretty old transmitters, but it meant that this thing actually literally crawled off and moved away quite slowly and then disappeared. In other words, it deleted itself from our perception.
Yes.
Okay? Now, I didn't know what these things were at the time, but that's the kind of thing that was going on in the transmitters. And because the transmitters in the pirate days would they would have a sort of communication with you. There'd be a consciousness there, and it would tell you there was a problem. And frequently in the days of KISS FM, which is the big megawatt station they put on in 1987 through to 1989 from Monaghan, from the same site, but we knew that the transmitters would sort of communicate with us, and the transmitters would fail to a lower fault mode to tell you there was another fault, that if you didn't fix it the whole thing would have blown up.
Wow. Okay.
So the transmitter, we had situations where the transmitters would be conscious and
As
protect
scuttlers.
themselves, but they didn't. The scuttlers only came in with the Energy 106 situation. And remember, Energy 106 was set up after the Irish legislation came in 1988, which closed all the radio stations down, illegally actually, in violation of the Irish Constitution.
Wow.
Because the radio stations up to that point were not illegal, they were just not licensed. They didn't have a license.
Yeah.
And that's because the Irish Constitution said you didn't have to have one.
Yes. Okay.
But the corrupt government of the era, the Hockey government and Burke came in, and they basically steamrolled through the Irish Constitution and introduced this regime of privately, of radio stations, which effectively were all owned by corporations outside, a lot of them main ones, companies outside.
Yeah.
And naturally, because they attacked the intelligence transfer sequence, which one could equate to the black goo actually,
Yes.
the form of attack that they took was to destroy, and likewise, because that was their intention, the ITS then says, right, your intention is to destroy this particular thing, so your intention will be reflected back on you.
Indeed.
And they ended up being destroyed.
Because I'm quite surprised really that the scuttlers never did attack you or come out.
Well, the problem about the scuttlers was that they were then noticed on people's backs at Sky Television.
Right.
Now, I never knew. I mean, when somebody says you've got a crab on your back, it's a bit of a sort of, what the hell are you talking about? So you've got to really learn really quickly. And these things seem to be able to attach to the back, and then they would infuse on the back left shoulder, in through the back of the ear, in through the C3 and C4 and 5 regions of the back of the neck. People would have problems, and it would gain access into the spinal column there, but also through the left ear.
Okay.
That's when it would infuse in. Now the thing about this is described quite well by Alara Blackwell when I interviewed her at the UFO Congress in Phoenix. Now the point about this is that it's one thing me observing these things and me getting information.
Yes.
What I needed to do was to get others who could tell me this independently without me actually
prompting them.
Yeah. So Alara was quite good at that, in that she actually verbalized what other people had told me already quietly in the background, other perceivers, and these particular scuttler things seem to be information. They go to information sourced things. In other words, this thing that was on the transmitter valve was
like the goo.
Well, the goo is looking for information.
Yeah.
But my information about the scuttlers is that they are alien technology but man-made. In other words, these are constructed subdimensional items. In other words, they're somehow shifted so they're not in our visual domain.
Yeah.
But they're physical devices which, when they get onto somebody's head, they'll get onto the head or they get into the thing, and they then put their legs or their sensors into the brain.
Yeah. But you did describe them as, when you opened up the box, the transmitter box.
This is the main power amplifier output stage.
Okay, but the scuttler would back off and disappear.
Consciousness perceiving them pushes them away.
Okay.
And then we have subsequent cases where Lisa Williams, who was interviewed on Basis 1, she described how there'd be scuttlers under the bed. She was having repeated abductions and things, and she got, like all decent girls, got the boyfriend out here, puts under the bed, and a big scuttler sitting there, a big spider type thing. And then just at the last Super Soldier Summit, when I was talking with Kerry Cassidy, she described that she's witnessed like a group of 5 of these things, all moving information. But her conclusion was that these had some kind of connection with the holographic matrix, the false reality that we're living in, that they actually are there to somehow construct or build the matrix that we exist in. So these would be in some respects creatures of the matrix.
Okay.
But that's all we sort of know about this.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah.
But they're pretty nasty things. Not particularly pleasant things.
Okay.
But I think also they would exist in the sort of astral domain when you're remote viewing and you're traveling in the astral domain. These creatures, you'd notice them. But the point is, these are mechanical creatures, and for instance, I think they've been described or illustrated in the film Transformers, where a small box like a transistor radio, whatever it is, was left in a particular computer area in the film, in the first Transformers movie, and this spider-like creature got out and started moving around, and then obviously in the science fiction series Stargate, the nano, I forget the name that they use in the thing, but they, in their most crude form, would be a kind of spider, which a crab type spider, which was in the TV series Stargate. Okay. So you're dealing with a thing about that size. The large versions, the only time that I would say that you're looking at something similar, if anybody wanted to get an idea of what they look like, would be to see Babylon 5, and in the Babylon 5 science fiction series, there are these large spider type shadow creatures, and that's part of what's called the Shadow Wars. Okay. And the point about Babylon 5 is that the script was, from I understand, written to closely illustrate human history and the Illuminati, and there's a lot more written about this, but those large spider type creatures in Babylon 5 are the closest you would get to actually seeing what these things would look like.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Now, in the last session that we did, and I've forgotten, and I've tried to locate the area, where I asked you, how did you do it? How did you do it? And you said, finally, I
Yeah.
did it.
Well, we don't want to tell too many secrets out of school. I
Okay,
believe.
so you can't expand on that then?
No.
All right then. Okay, well, that's it then, really.
Thank you, Miles.
Thank you, Miles. Thank you
All right.
very
That was
much.
great.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's great.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah.
All donations will be gratefully received to carry on this work.
Yes,
Yeah, well,
indeed.
essentially, because Edge Television has effectively gone down in terms of any new programming, and then a lot of the programming that was sort of trying to get out on Edge ended up on Paradigm Shift TV, which aired through the Showcase TV channel. That's now effectively under threat if it's going to survive at all.
All right.
But the long and short of it is that these people expect these things for nothing,
Yes.
and consequently all the outlets on broadcast television doing this for nothing are being taken off the air because other people have got money, they're just butting in on the space.
Yeah. If you could advertise, let everybody know that Miles is going to be appearing on Channel 4
Yeah, Channel 4, June 13th.
at 9.
The Amash Project and Alien Investigations. I don't know the title of the program yet. Channel 4, I don't know how to give it. But an alien abductee based on the Amash Project work founded by the beautiful Joanne Summerscales will be on Channel 4, terrestrial TV, on June the 13th at 9 o'clock.